Hey, welcome back to the Typewriter video series, everybody. I have an interesting project for today. So I was reading on Mark Adams' typewriter.org blog, his typewriter blog, for the date of August 19th, 2019. He has an interesting article. This was a reprint of a newsletter called the Brown and Holland Shorthand News, dated October 1884. And this person was W.N. Jennings, and Mr. Jennings apparently was in the habit of taking carbon paper and cutting it into strips and taping it together to make typewriter ribbons out of carbon paper. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting thought. Let's try that. Stay tuned. So you might be thinking to yourself, Joe, why do we need to make typewriter ribbons out of carbon paper? Because cloth ribbons are readily available everywhere. You can order them online in different sellers, and big box retailers occasionally have them. Why would you want to use carbon paper for ribbons? Well, it's just a fun thing to try. Let's do it. Is there anything to this? Does it work? Will it work in every machine? I don't know. That's what you guys have to decide, is maybe try this for yourself. But before I go into the trouble of slicing up carbon paper into half-inch strips and taping it together and winding it onto spools, I wanted to do just a really brief test of what does it look like if you type on carbon paper onto a backing paper. Does it actually look good? I mean, I don't know how many of you guys have actually used carbon paper before, but believe it or not, it can actually look pretty good. Okay, the quickest way to test and see if your typewriter will make good copy with carbon paper, and if your carbon paper is any good, is put a piece of paper in your machine, set the bichrome color setting to the stencil position so the ribbon in the machine won't be used, and then just put your piece of carbon paper just behind the ribbon vibrator like that. And what you want to do is, as you're typing, you want to move the carbon paper with the paper, so you're typing on a fresh piece of carbon paper on every imprint, just like as if it was a ribbon. It's actually pretty darn good. Let me do a test with the typewriter's own ribbon just to compare. So the typing on top is with carbon paper only, and the typing on bottom is with the ribbon that was in this Smith Corona Silent Super. And as you can see, the carbon paper imprint is darker because I was just using probably the dry part of this ribbon that had been sitting out. But there's also an interesting difference, though, between the sharpness of the various letters. It looks like with the cloth ribbon on the bottom, you can see a little bit of the texture of the fabric ribbon, whereas on the carbon paper imprint, the letters look crisper, which is interesting. So I was actually surprised by the difference in quality. Now, the carbon paper I'm using happens to be a Staples brand, and this I purchased a few years ago. So it's not brand new, but it's within the last decade, let's say. So what we're going to have to do here is several things. First, we're going to need to find some spools, a spare set of typewriter spools that you can make your ribbon on. I happen to have a set of universal spools laying around, plastic kind. And these are the kind that have the little plastic hooks on the inside where you snag the ribbon to get it started. And I don't want to break those hooks off because I might want to reuse this ribbon, but I don't want those hooks scratching the paper because I don't know how strong or how weak this carbon paper is. And so the idea is I'm going to be cutting strips of carbon paper half-inch wide, taping them together with adhesive tape. Now, unfortunately, the only adhesive tape I have is 3/4 of an inch wide, so we're going to have to if that's the case with you, you'll have to take a little razor knife and trim each tape joint. So it's going to be a little intricate, but it's going to be fun, hopefully. So there's basically two ways that you can cut the carbon paper. One of the ways is to get a razor knife and a straight edge and a cutting surface, and carefully measure out your half-inch marks and slice them on a like a cutting pad, a cutting mat. And the other way is to use a paper trimmer. Now, I happen to have a Office Max plastic kind of paper trimmer, but this one has a really good edge that the blade, where the blade meshes with this straight edge, it maintains a real sharp cut. And I'm going to use this for the main trimming of the paper. So I have a scrap of carbon paper here just to show you the method I'm going to use for cutting it. And so I've trimmed the carbon paper's width so that it is an even multiple of half-inch increments. And so what I do is this side over here, I'm going to line it up with a half-inch mark, and it turns out there are half-inch grid marks on this cutting board. So I line that up evenly here, and then I take a straight edge and I put the straight edge right along just before you get to the cutting edge here. And this straight edge holds the paper down so it doesn't slip, especially as you start cutting up toward this end where the angle of the cutting blade becomes more shallow. Sometimes it wants to push the paper, so this keeps the paper secure, and you end up with a really nice little cut here of paper. So to start the new page, of course, I'm not on the width of the paper, it's not in even half-inch increments, so I'm going to have to move the paper over. So you want to make sure that your back edge is firmly even against the back of the cutting board. Make sure this edge is nice and even, and then you have this guy here, and this is just waste that you trim off, so we'll get that out of the way. Now we can start our actual trimming, and so we'll just be moving the paper half-inch increments according to the lines that we have already inscribed on the cutting board. You want to make sure that you're taping the strips down on the back side of the carbon film, not the front side. Otherwise, when you type, you hit a piece of tape, you won't make a mark. So tape it on the back side of the paper. So I'm going to just lay my Scotch tape across here. Then I'm going to peel this up carefully. Put my cardboard, protective cardboard, underneath it, and then do my slicing of my 3/4 inch wide tape that unfortunately is too wide for this. Okay. Peel that off, and now we can continue. We're down to the end of the roll here, and I want to put some tape. So the way this thing has to be taped, I'm going to have to put the tape on the glue side onto the carbon film, and then slice the tape to a half-inch width approximately so that it'll fit onto the spool, something like that. So now I can take this tape and stick it to the inner hub of the typewriter ribbon spool. So, like that. It's carbon film on a paper backing, but look at the sheen on that. It looks kind of cool. I'm anxious to thread it into my Smith Corona and see if it works. Okay, so to start with, I'm going to have to remove the ribbon that's in this machine. So let me unthread it here. We'll set that aside for now. Or take up spool on the right. So it's going to be a little tricky getting it in. The problem is you don't want to wrinkle the paper too badly. Okay, so I have succeeded in getting the paper ribbon threaded through the vibrator area, and of course I have quite a few wrinkles in one little section, which brings the point to mind that if you're going to do this on a practical basis, you're probably going to want to have a leader of cloth ribbon on both ends, both spools, that you can tape the paper ribbon to, so you can start it with the cloth ribbon. It's more flexible, it makes it easier to get in there. And the other thing is you want to make sure, so in this case our take-up spool is on the right, our supply spool is on the left. Make sure you have the direction set to where you know the take-up spool is going to be turning. Okay, so let's get some paper, and this is the same paper that I did that test with earlier. So let's start this. All right. Well, it actually looks like it works. So here you can see the letters being imprinted on the ribbon, and there is my actual printing, and it looks pretty neat. A little bit of smudging, probably residue from the carbon paper, but pretty darn sharp. And I would advise you setting the bichrome color setting to the black or blue position, the top of the ribbon, and the reason why is that means the motion of the ribbon as it goes up is minimized. So it minimizes the amount of motion, so that will minimize potentially the amount of damage that might happen to the paper tape. And of course, once you've used up this ribbon, you can flip the color selector to the red position and use the other side, the other bottom edge of the ribbon, and make sure you set your machine to run the other direction. So you can get 2 passes out of this. And if you have one of those Hermes 3000s that has a third setting for the middle of the ribbon, you might be able to get a third pass through the middle of the ribbon itself. Well, this was a rather whimsical project, don't you think? I'm not certain how practical this is, actually. Would you really want to use a typewriter like this? Well, once I got the paper strips cut, taped together, threaded on the reel, and once I got it threaded into the vibrator on the typewriter, it actually works pretty good. I think threading it through the vibrator of this machine was the trickiest part, because you don't realize how much you rely upon the flexibility of a cloth ribbon to fold it over and get it through those little guides. So the paper is quite a bit more fragile than the cloth in that sense. So I would recommend, if you're actually going to be doing this, practically speaking, is to leave about 12 inches or so of cloth ribbon as a leader on both spools, and then you can tape your carbon paper strip to that leader, but that cloth leader will make it a lot easier to thread into your typewriter, and I think that's the most practical way to do it. So is there any advantage in doing this, or is there any particular benefit to using a carbon ribbon? Well, first of all, think about it. It is a carbon ribbon. Now, it's not carbon film in the sense of being coated on a plastic base like with electronic typewriters and IBM Selectrics, but it is a carbon film on a paper base. And if you look, like for instance, the very top 2 lines of test typing that I did earlier, and if I look carefully at them, I see that the carbon paper typing really does look sharper and crisper than the cloth ribbon typing. The cloth looks like, under high magnification, you can see the weave of the fabric of the cloth ribbon in the letters, and they're not quite as distinct, whereas the carbon paper imprint is crisper and sharper. You see the letters better resolved or formed. It might depend upon what kind of paper you're using. I'm using a kind of copy paper, the kind you'd put in a laser printer, cheap copy paper, but perhaps a higher quality paper, maybe some Clairefontaine or something like that, it might end up working better for carbon paper. So there is some experimentation needed to see what's the optimal kind of paper that carbon paper film will stick to better. It's not bad. It is sharper, I think, than a cloth ribbon. It's just a little bit of a hassle making it. And threading it in there, as I say, is going to be a lot easier with a cloth leader on your spool. So maybe if you want a pretty high quality sharp imprint, this might be something to try. So all this test typing, this was a quarter of a page, maybe 2 or 3 inches of text on a Elite font machine, and I still have probably half that ribbon. The two spools look about evenly sized right now, so I'm about halfway done with that ribbon that I've done. Roughly just under 15 feet of ribbon, 5 meters or 5 yards. So, well, this was fun. Not entirely practical, but it's a little bit of a whimsical, creative project you guys might want to try. Making carbon paper ribbons. Paper-based carbon film, one-time use ribbons for your typewriter. It was fun. Well, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, drop them down below. I'd love to hear from you. And as always, stay creative and have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye for now.